entire process. So, officially, welcome to everybody that's logged in and participating in the Zoom webinar on the ergonomics regulation. What I'm going to be doing is going through the process, just introduce myself, introduce Penny, introduce our company and how we operate and what our intentions are with all this training material, and then give you an opportunity of asking questions and commenting at the end. So we've got exactly 40 minutes in which to do it. Apparently that's what Zoom gives us. And then we can do a question and answer session if necessary, or you can contact me via WhatsApp. You all got my WhatsApp number now, and I'll answer the questions to the best of my ability. Anybody sitting there without the material, don't fret, it's going to come to you. I've just been fiddling around with the PowerPoints, and you'll get that in a short while. So let me get going. You know, as many of you know, that Penny and I started this organization, INTRA, a couple of years ago. We hail from Cape Town. We've been involved in the health and safety world for a long time. And as you can see, we are even health and safety conscious out on the road when we cycle. We've done a couple of Cape Town August or Cape Town cycle tours. And we just believe that if we're going to be in the health and safety game, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we live the life, that we are actually exempling what we talk about. So Penny and I are out on the road a lot. And we wear our lights and brights wherever we go. And for us, it's just a way of life now. And that's exactly what we want the health and safety profession to be. There are a lot of folk out there that are in the health and safety game, and we know that they could make a massive contribution towards the country and the people by presenting training material to people. So for that reason, about 10, 15 years ago, we started publishing occupational health and safety training material. The material is customizable, it's cost effective. We've got over 60 affiliate licensees and about 500 users. We allow and invite people to run their own legal compliance, non-credit bearing training. It's training material that you can adapt to your risk profile, and you'll receive it in a content-rich format, and then you can customize and modify and update and add and all those other good things there. Now, this training material is SIOSH CPD accredited, which essentially means that SIOSH members can claim their CPD points. Some of it is unit standard aligned, and for those of you that were on the training with me the other day, back in Cape Town, Durban and Joburg, you'll know the big issues around this whole story. And then lastly, I just want to mention that our material is very, very distinctly plagiarization free. So Zoom is a lovely platform that we operate on, and I'm going to run through the presentation on this, but while you're sitting there with your laptop or your cell phone, you need to know that we'll be recording it, and if for any reason your signal drops, if Eskom's power goes out or something like that, it'll be on YouTube probably by 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock tonight. So that's my invitation to you, that you can watch it, and you can watch it over and over and over again. One of the things you may want to do is slow me down, because I speak at quite a pace, a lot of material, and those of you that know me know that I love to run around and jump up and down and do all kinds of things in the lecture room. But you may want to just slow me down a little, then I can speak to you at a normal pace. So feel free to do that. Okay, the next thing I need to say to you is that there is a disclaimer. Penny and I are not lawyers. I am an ex-policeman. I love legislation. I've been involved in the investigation world for a long time, security and safety and so forth. But if you do have a legal issue, you can go directly to SIOSH. They've got a legal forum, and you can speak to the advocate there. Or, of course, you contact your own legal counsel and ask them for advice on this entire process if you have any questions around this. Okay. So I mentioned that we're publishers of occupational health and safety training material. We've got 16 training packs at the moment, and the ERGOTRAC is the one that we're dealing with now. ERGOTRAC Part 1. It's about the occupational health and safety ergonomics regulation, the regulation aspect of it. And it's going to give you material that you can share with your people. As you'll see shortly, it's a legal requirement that we actually do that. I mentioned that we are SIOSH accredited. We are members, corporate members of SIOSH, and you can get this material accredited by SIOSH for CPD points by becoming a corporate member. We're also publishers of a variety of books, and many of you know about the 1 Minute Safety Manager. Some of you may already have had the rerun of Movers, Shakers, Moaners and Groaners, which is an absolute bestseller, and then a couple of other publications for the safety world as well. I want to ask those of you that are digitally orientated to find us on Facebook, and please comment and connect and tell us your cares and concerns and so forth. It's a wonderful platform for health and safety, and we found that we're able to reach a large market because of the whole Facebook thing. So the presenters material that you'll be getting is focused predominantly on trainers and presenters and facilitators and instructors, people that are actually going to be running this training for their clients or obviously for their own staff. And that's the focus of this session today. It's an orientation for trainers. They'll receive this training material, and I'm going to focus my attention predominantly around the facilitator visuals. So you'll receive the PowerPoints, which you can then obviously update and modify as you go along. Now, folks, please note, this course may only be presented as a legal compliance mandatory training course. It is a non-credit bearing SACWA short course. And in the light of the whole issues around SACWA, CETA, NQF, QCTO, and all of these things, you may issue a certificate of attendance, but not a certificate of competency. So let's get going. Okay, so some of the people I noticed that have logged on, some of you are probably new to the world of health and safety. So for those more experienced ones, please forgive me if I just run through a couple of thoughts here. To understand the occupational health and safety legislation, we need to know and refer to it by its real name. It's not the OSH Act. Now, a lot of people call it the OSH Act. There is an American piece of legislation called the OSH Act, but in South Africa, it's H before S, health before safety, because health is the problem and ergonomics is one of those issues. So the Act itself is signed off by the President. The multiple regulations are signed off or promulgated by the Department of Employment and Labour and the Minister. And then from time to time, we get notices from the Chief Inspector in the form of a notice similar to the one about the first aid training that's come out recently. I find a lot of people get upset when they look at the legislation, they go, but it shouldn't be like that. Well, we do get an opportunity every single time they bring out legislation or regulations to comment on it. And the ergonomics regulation was out for comment for a good couple of months. And what we've got is what the market commented on. So it's important to know that people have contributed and you do have the right to actually comment on the regulations or pieces of legislation as and when they come up. Now, on the training that I normally run, I say to people, which of these regulations apply to you? So you've got the Act, you've got the regulations. Which of these apply to you? And focus your attention around those that apply to you. And there's a host, there's over 20 regulations. This new ergonomics regulation is obviously the one we're going to be dealing with, but there are many other pieces of legislation. You need to read them. And the easiest way to read a piece of legislation, I believe, is to put it in bullet form. So if you take the legislation, put in bullets, and then you, like in the PowerPoint, you can then break it down, it'll make sense to you. And that's what I've done here. For instance, Section 8 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act says quite specifically that the employer must provide information, instructions, training, supervision, and all of that must be risk specific. And risk specific, just alluding to the fact that every single organization has its own risk profile. People have their own risk profile, and I like to refer to it as their risk DNA, and it's quite unique. And as a result of that, you can then put a training program or developmental program together for these people, such as taking a brand new person with induction and awareness right to the stage where they could become a health and safety officer, as an example, using the appropriate training that we've got available, and you can obviously source in the marketplace. Now, folks, to me, the primary reason that we do health and safety is the prevention of injuries and diseases and damage and disruption and disability and death and all that type of stuff. It's not compliance and it's not credits or accreditation. You are going to be asked whether this is accredited or not. And you know, this is like the elephant in the room nowadays. Most people that ask that question don't actually know it. It's almost like they were saying, do you have a driver's license? And when we respond, yes, that's the end of the discussion. But many people have to go through a particularly expensive 50, 60, 70, 80,000 Rand worth of accreditation just so that they can say yes. So I keep on pointing out to you or to people that accreditation and approval is not a legal requirement other than simple things like first aid and lifting machine and fall protection and commercial divers, and now a little bit in the ergonomics regulation. Just to put I give you an overview of this accreditation process. I reckon that there's 15, 16 different GPS waypoints that you have to go through before you can get a course accredited and or get a learner to declare that they're competent. And the problem with this is quite simply a one-day course could take 8 or 9 months to deliver a certificate to go through the entire process that I would like to regard as the accreditation cycle. Now, there's a lot to be said on this, and I've created a video specifically to talk about CETA accreditation. I've written a book on it, or like a blog article, and you can access that, and you can get that from our website. You can go onto the website and collect it, just to make sure that you know what this is all about. Okay, to end the waffle, and I'm just allowing other people to come on, and I want to say to the people that have just come on, I can see a couple of new folk there. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's really nice to have you with us. Okay, copyright is a big issue when it comes to training material. We talk about being plagiarization free, but in this instance, I want to point out that the ergonomics regulation, the copyright of that vests with the government printer and the Department of Employment and Labour. All we ask is please don't reproduce this training material and go off and sell it to somebody else. So let's get into it. The ergonomics regulation came out on the 6th of December last year, just before Christmas. And for those of you that are not familiar with ergonomics as such, it is the study of work and obviously the impact of work on people and their bodies and the human being. The legislators brought out a regulation and explanatory notes, and this legislation is made up of 13 regulations. The primary ones are regulations 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Of course, when I send you the material, you'll be able to go through the others, and you'll be able to pick out the little bits and pieces that are relevant to you and or exclude that which is not relevant to you. Now, always with all legislation, Regulation 1 or Section 1 is a definition, such as, it says here, the Act means the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So we know that now. There's a definition on adverse health effects, means causation, promotion, facilitation, and exacerbation of a structural or functional abnormality, which has the implication that the abnormality produced has the potential of lowering the quality of life, contributing to disabling illness, or leading to premature death. Okay, having said that, this is the first one that I want to show you. All I've done is essentially taken the legislation and put in bullet points so that you can discuss each one of those bullet points with your people. The next definition is a very, very important one. This is the definition of competent person, and it's referred to here in this ergonomic regulation. And I want to say this, don't stress, it only applies to the risk assessor themselves. And the risk assessor, we'll talk about in a short while, is somebody that's going to be performing a risk analysis in the workplace. And it says that this person, the risk assessor, the competent person, must have the necessary knowledge, training, and experience in ergonomics, and where applicable, qualifications specific to ergonomics. You'll see then that it references the MQF Act, and it says right at the end there that this person must be familiar with the Act and the applicable regulations. So already you've got the regulations here in terms of training material, and your competent person, you can run them through this training program so that they can become familiar with this specific regulation. To assist you, we've also got a training pack called Legal Liability, which is more comprehensive about the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and you can run that in conjunction with this to provide the people with the necessary information as far as the Act is concerned. Now, the next definition over here is that of the Chief Director. I've faded it. It's not all that important. It's not relevant to us. It's more relevant to the Department of Employment and Labour, but design is. And design is a word that you need to look at carefully and need to understand this word, because it talks about, includes drawings, calculations, design details, and specifications. Imagine a maintenance supervisor or an engineer having to create a workplace for someone. And they're going to be working in that workplace, or a layout and a plant and a flow diagram and all those sorts of stuff. Well, that very distinctly is design, and they become a designer. So consider these people, that these people will need to prepare the design, check and approve the design, arrange for people to, under their supervision, to do exactly the same thing. And in paragraph E, it says, and contributes to or has overall responsibility for machinery, plant, or work systems design. So, wow, that's a broad category of people that we're talking about over there. The definition of ergonomics starts off by saying it's a scientific discipline. And it is true to say that most health and safety people do not and have not studied this scientific discipline. So, folks, here's a wonderful opportunity for you to expand your own knowledge and to become an ergonomist if necessary, either a diploma or degree course, and you can follow this entire process so that you can do the risk assessments, understanding what it is that's going on in the workplace. It says a scientific discipline concerned with the fundamental understanding of interactions and the profession. So there we have it. In order to optimize human well-being and overall system performance. Watch this term, human well-being and overall system performance. It comes up again and again and again. Then they talk about the ergonomic risk, and it means the characteristics or actions in the workplace or workplace conditions or combination thereof that may impair overall system performance and human well-being. Again, for those of you that are going to be lecturing in the arena of health and safety legislation, excuse me, put in the bullet points, work with the bullet points. It just breaks it up so much easier, and it's easier to work with. Then the important one, wow, this is a really important one. It's the risk assessment. And the risk assessment talks about identifying and analyzing, evaluating, and prioritizing any risk from exposure to ergonomic risk associated with the workplace. We'll be talking about HIRA in a short while, and this is a very important one. We now have to according to this regulation, include ergonomics into our hires. Then there are two definitions over here, one supplier and the other one is work system. Work system, that I think is pretty obvious, but watch the supplier. Now, suppliers could mean people that are in the supply game, such as wholesalers and retailers and manufacturers of plant and equipment. That's a very interesting one. So if you go down to the local supermarket, your builder's warehouse, for instance, and they supply you with equipment, watch out, watch this. They have a duty to you, the potential user. I stuck in this big logo that says who, because this legislation or the regulation applies to a number of people. It applies to the employer and the self-employed person. And it applies to these designers, manufacturers, importers, or suppliers. There are other people where the who comes up again, and I'll talk about that. But now, into a particularly important one. For those of you that are in the training game and will be running training courses on ergonomics, this is critical. I want to say to you, you need to read this over and over and over again so that you have get your head around it, because this is a very important piece of legislation. This piggybacks on Section 8 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And what I've done is, again, I've just highlighted the words that are more important. It says the employer must, after consultation with the Health and Safety Committee or the Health and Safety representatives. Now, let me just stop there. It says after consultation with the Health and Safety Committee and or the Health and Safety representatives. So what are they consulting on? Ergonomics. How can they consult with the Health and Safety Committee or Health and Safety representative if the Health and Safety representative or committee doesn't know anything about ergonomics? So for those of you that are in the training game, that is going to be an addition to the curriculum or the course content for Health and Safety Committee and Health and Safety rep training. Ergonomics. That specific danger, hazard, and risk has to be dealt with. Then it carries on and it says the employer must establish for all employees and mandatories or persons other than employees. Wow, other than employees. Well, that if you're in the retail industry and somebody walks into your premises, does that mean you have to train them? Well, you can debate that one there, but it says that they must establish, the employer must establish a training program. That's interesting. Okay, so now remember there's three words: inform, instruct, and train. And the word inform, this could be an information session, not necessarily a training session. And we debate that or discuss that in our Train the Trainer program. Now, what are we going to train them in? The scope of these regulations. And I said, you've now got the regulations so you can train them. Then the potential sources of exposure. And if you're looking at the regulations and the scope, those couple of sections over there, those 10 sections which need to be dealt with. We'll come back to those. It carries on and says that this ergonomic risk information instruction and training incorporates the nature, the potential, the control measures, the procedures, and the precautions to be taken. It doesn't end there. It actually says that the training must also talk about the assessment of exposure, the necessity for medical surveillance, and the long-term benefits of undergoing such surveillance. It says the employer must conduct training prior to the placement of the relevant employee. That's an important one in Section 2. Before the employee is placed, and you'll see this comes up again, and then in 3 it says you must conduct, or the employer must conduct, refresher training at intervals that may be recommended by the Health and Safety Committee. Sure, well that's quite a mouthful, isn't it? So Section 3 is really, really important. So once again, we've got the training material that you could use, and when we come out with part 2 of the ERGOTRAC, which should be ready by the end of the month, you'll be able to get into the actual meaty, gritty stuff in ergonomics. Just want to mention that it has been co-developed by an academic who has a PhD in the sciences, so she'll be, and has been helping us extensively on it. A little bit slow, but it's coming. Don't worry about that. Okay, then Section 4, it talks about who again. And these are duties of the person exposed to the risk. It says any person who's exposed must obey lawful orders. That makes sense. And must obey lawful orders regarding the adopted measures, and they must cooperate with the employer. It carries on and says they must obey regarding the reporting of potential ergonomic risks, and they must obey regarding the reporting for medical surveillances. Moving on to Section 5, once again, who? Here we come back to the designer, manufacturer, importer, and supplier of the machinery and the plant and the working systems, and it introduces for the first time this concept called reasonably practicable. Those that have attended my training program on the Occupational Health and Safety Act know that I get into that quite deep, and the legal liability program deals with that. Again, it talks about so that we can optimize human well-being and overall system performance. Now, it carries on and it says as far as reasonably practicable, This must relate to transportation, reception, storing, and handling of goods and services. That's really quite a broad section. And when you're doing your HIRO, you're going to have to write that in and consider it. Now, that person, the designer, manufacturer, importer, and supplier, wow, watch this, must provide information, instruction, and training to you so that you can provide information, instruction, and training to your learner. Have a look at the guidance notes that you will be getting, and it talks about this as a question of, well, everybody can do it. My big question is, gosh, that's wonderful, thank you very much. Do the people in our resource departments that are purchasing in our procurement department know that they can demand this? And secondly, how do we translate this in a way that those who aren't particularly familiar with English are going to be able to understand and work with it? Okay, it carries on and talks about this person must also provide information to potential users. Gosh, so you're going to be quite busy with training, information, instruction, and training across the board within your organization, employees, contractors, and subcontractors, and so forth. Okay, now the big one. Remember I spoke about the risk assessor and I spoke about competency. So this is an important one because people are going to claim to be competent and they're going to claim to be risk assessors. But it says here that the employer must, before the commencement of any work, before the commencement, that's tomorrow morning, before you may commence any work that may expose employees to ergonomic risks, have an ergonomic risk assessment performed by a competent person. Well, we're going to have to play loose and easy on this one because we just don't have enough people in the country yet. And then it says the ergonomic risk assessment contemplated must be performed after consultation with the health and safety committee or health and safety reps. So I'm pointed out we're going to have to train them and get them up and running. Then we must repeat this every 2 years. Wow. And it says what it must contain. The risk assessment must include a complete hazard identification. We've got the HIRO training pack, which you could use to train your people. And it carries on and says that this risk assessment must identify all the people who may be affected by ergonomic risks. It must identify how these people may be affected. It must identify and discuss and address the analysis and evaluation and the rating and the scales of the risk. And then, of course, the prioritization, suggesting that some are obviously a lot more important than others. So now you have a bit of an action plan of what you can do is work with that. And then once this risk assessment's been done, it's got to be reviewed again. It says once the assessment is no longer valid, once the control measures are no longer effective, once there's been change to technology and scientific advances and so forth. And then it continues by saying the employer must review the relevant ergonomic. I don't know when the employer is going to get all these things done. Obviously, they have. So I'm not skeptical, but wow, it's a lot of work that this ergonomics regulation has brought about. New work that's going to have to be done. And I'm saying to health and safety practitioners around the country, guys, gals, get your act together. If you don't know what this is all about, you're going to have to literally outsource it, whereas you could do it. So here we go. It says the employer must review the relevant ergonomic risk assessment when there's been a change in the work methods, or the type of work carried out has changed, or the type of equipment that's in use is going to change, or the control measures have changed. And then it says when an incident occurs, or you have to review the ergonomic risk assessment when medical surveillance reveals an adverse effect where ergonomic risks are identified as a contributing factor. Okay, now we've got a picture of what we're going to be doing, and then they say, what are we going to do to control it? Now, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the hierarchy of control, and I'm sure you're familiar with the term mitigation. And mitigation meaning the prevention and or control of these dangers, hazards, and risks in the workplace. Now, this is the old school hierarchy of control. There's probably a couple of variations of this, but in essence, it's the removal, it's the replacement, it's the redesign, it's the retraining, the regulation, the supervision, and finally, the supervision and issuing of personal protective equipment to people. Which now brings us to medical surveillance. This is a new person that's going to be involved in your health and safety program, and he or she will be an occupational medicine practitioner. Occupational medicine practitioners are different to occupational health practitioners, as we know, and these two are defined in the Occupational Health and Safety Act itself. So this is a professional that you're going to have to call on, and they're going to have to come in and do the medical surveillance for and on behalf of the organization when the risk assessment identifies that there is such a risk. It suggests then that it must be done when the employee starts. Wow. So if an employee is going to be working in a workplace where there is an ergonomic risk, They must receive or go through medical surveillance. They must undergo medical surveillance once again on a periodic basis, not exceeding 2 years, and then exit. So it's entry, duration, during, and then exit. So you need to sit down with your health and safety team, talk about this, and then you definitely have to speak to your human resources team so that they can integrate this into the employment and selection and placement practices. They need to look at the job specs and everything like that, safe work procedures, and ensure that employees are covered by every single one of these requirements, and that the employer is covered by the fact that they've actually done it. So Section 9 then talks about the fact that employed and self-employed people. Now, I think self-employed people, gosh, I used to have about 20 people on my staff at one stage, and there were ergonomic risks there. I mean, some of the furniture that we had bought was secondhand from the old office years ago, and that could nowadays be regarded as an ergonomic risk. Thankfully, we got rid of the furniture, and we also changed the model that we operate with. So it says here, the employer self-employed person must, where reasonably practicable, ensure that the control measure provided for the benefit of employees complies with the regulation and is fully and appropriately implemented. Now, remember we touched on Section 8 says, inform, instruct, train, and supervise. That's the section. And who does the implementation? Well, this section over here talks about a supervisor. It talks about the managers and charge hands and foremen, people that maintain the organization. Remember, that's not a health and safety representative. Health and safety representatives are great because they're eyes and ears in the workplace, but this is a supervisory role. We've now gone through the process, we've done the assessment, we've got our medical records, and now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be proving that these activities and compliance issues have been dealt with. So here it says that the employer must keep records of documents contemplated in Regulation 3, 6, 7, and 8. Well, 3 is information, instruction, and training. 6 is the ergonomic risk assessment. 7 is the risk control. 8 is the medical surveillance. And 9 is the maintenance of the control measures whatsoever. It carries on and says that the employer, or self-employed person, must keep records for a minimum of 40 years for Regulation 6 and 8. That's the ergonomic risk assessment and the medical surveillance. For 3 years for records contemplated in Regulations 7 and 9, which is risk control and maintenance of control, and for the entire duration or length of time that the employee remains at the workplace for records contemplated in Regulation 3. Regulation 3, once again, information, instruction, and training. And on the train the training provider that I've been running and will be running is, please note, we spoke about the fact that these records have to be kept in such a way that you don't divulge the information. If you divulge the information, there's an act called a POPI Act, and there's all of those issues that go around about that. So enough of that. The privacy issue also when it comes to these documents is very, very important. So there's 2 sections over here. As far as is concerned, this legislation says that health and safety reps and committees and so forth, and the inspector may have access to the documents in Regulation 3, 6, 7, and 9, but not in Regulation 8. Remember, Regulation 8 was the medical surveillance issue. It continues and says, if you close down, employer, what you must do is you must hand over or forward by registered post. Gosh, does the post office even work? I don't know. All records to the relevant chief director of provincial operations. And in many instances, this is liquidation and sequestration. The company just closes down. They close it down. This is an important one that people need to know, that there is a criminal liability over here if those records go missing. And the records must contain at least the following information of the employee, such as names and surnames, and gender and date of birth, the name of the spouse and closest relative, and where available, permanent residential address and postal code. Whew. Okay, so now we're 32 minutes into the presentation. I hope I'm not going too fast. And for those of you that have logged on, welcome. Really nice to have you with us. I am recording this, and I'm going to be uploading this specifically to YouTube, so you'll be able to watch from the beginning. For those of you that have been watching up to now and know that I speak like a racehorse, you'll be able to go onto YouTube and you'll be able to slow it down, and you'll be able to go through it individually using the PowerPoints that I'm going to send you, together with your the legislation itself and the advisory or guidance notes. Now, it means that you're going to have to do your own homework. This section over here, section 11, isn't all that important. This relates more to the Department of Labor, the establishment of this Health and Safety Technical Committee, and the only time that would be relevant to you is if you want to lobby them and or you want to serve on them. And you'll see that it's made up of a variety of people. They talk about a tripartite body, and that tripartite body will obviously give the Department of Labor sufficient insight and comment and concerns and critique, and to hopefully keep this all on track. Unless you want to serve on it, this is not all that relevant, but I do believe that this is something that you may want to look at if you're very involved in the technical side of ergonomics. Okay, so let me not belabor that point. Let me get to the next one, which is offences and penalties. I mentioned earlier on that this is criminal legislation. And I had a comment from somebody just the other day, and he said to me, the penalties in this piece of legislation are hopeless. They're absolutely pathetic. And you know what, I kind of like understand what he's talking about. Because if you look at it at face value, it says 200 Rand for each day in which the offence continued, and that's ridiculous. And a company that's in non-compliance have done that for a year, 200 times 365. It's a joke, you know, it's not a lot of money. But what you don't sometimes appreciate is that this all operates under the Magistrate Courts Act. And the Magistrate Courts Act, to the best of my knowledge, allows the magistrate to set another fine. He or she will set the fine that is appropriate to the crime that has been committed. And that crime can then be added to, or sorry, my apologies, the penalty can then be added to with the extra 200 Rand per day or extra imprisonment of 1 day and so forth. So this is to top it up. Now, at this stage, I want to just point out once again that is criminal legislation, and people need to know and understand that they could, in fact, land up with a fine and or be imprisoned. The probability, honestly, is so remote that I wouldn't run around scaring people with it. What I would do is I would inform employers that it is critical for them to get the workplace in order so that the employees and contractors and subcontractors, members of the public, or whoever comes onto their premises, that they're not exposed to the ergonomic risk, and they don't suffer from these diseases and injuries and disability that we're talking about. Okay, I mentioned right in the beginning that this regulation came through on the 6th of December, just before Christmas, as a nice Christmas gift for us to read to kind of like go through. Okay, as I start wrapping up here, what I want to say is that there is an action plan. And for those of you that have gone through this process, you're going to read it, you're going to study it, you're going to familiarize yourself, I'm sure. You can ask questions, send me questions, and I will deal with them as and when I can. If not, I'm going to refer you to a couple of people who will be able to do it, because I'm not an ergonomist. And I do know that there are people like the ERGOTRAC and so forth, with a man by the name of Dale Kennedy, who runs some excellent training programs. I'd strongly urge you to look them up and go and attend the courses, acquire the necessary scientific knowledge so that you know what you're talking about over here. So where to from here? Well, maybe some of these training programs would suit your organization, where you'll be able to create this developmental process for individuals, taking them from start to finish, whether they are the newest employee or existing employees. Of course, the ergonomics program will be coming out shortly, and I mentioned that. But here's a thought, and it's quite a serious thought. You know that we have about 16.4 million employees in South Africa. Now, do you realize that this ergonomics regulation applies to every single one of them if they fall under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and the majority of them do? Which essentially means that if you're a service provider, you've got a lot of work ahead of you, and it's a good business opportunity. But it essentially means that we're going to be working night and day to get health and safety committees and health and safety representatives and employers up to speed so that they know about ergonomics. And people would often say to me, but sure, that's a heck of a task. Well, it is, and I suggest that you start here. Start with the legal compliance stuff. Remember I mentioned to you that accredited training, the GPS waypoints are, wow, it's just crazy. From 01 to number 16 could be as much as 6, 7, 8, 9 months before the person receives their certificate. And then they receive a certificate and 1 or 2 credits. That's it. I have not even been able to find an appropriate unit standard for ergonomic legislation at this stage. Why? Because it only came out on the 6th of December and nobody seems to have written one yet. There are 1 or 2 other unit standards that one can talk about, but instead of focusing your attention on that, and instead of me and the rest of the team getting knickers in a knot, what we're saying is work around the legal compliance issues. Have a look at element number 1, where you select the right person and train them. Then obviously you need to get some agreement. Remember, we were talking about that the Health and Safety Committee and Health and Safety representatives must consult with the employer on the whole training aspect. You may want to find an accredited training provider, or in some instances, you want to just find a training provider who can run the training for you. They then facilitate the process, whether on your own premises as an in-house course, or you actually go out to the premises where the course is run as a public course. We then jump right through to waypoint number 15, which means that the employer has been informed, instructed, and trained, and the employer is in compliance. Wow, that's been a mouthful. So folks, there's a lot of information that I'd still like to share with you. I'd like to interact with you. Please feel free to send me your questions, and please tell me what you think of this session. The intention is to get it over and done with as quickly as possible. The idea would be almost like pulling the plaster off. You could do it slowly and painfully, or as we've just done now, do it as quickly, as rapidly as possible, and then ask you, the participant, to actually study the material yourself. I'm going to be bringing out this next training program, the ERGOTRAC Part 2, and that is fairly comprehensive. It's going to be about a day-long course, which you can then adjust and adopt as you want. Now, in your pack, when I send it to you, there is an evaluation form. I'd like you to print it, and if you don't mind, fill it in, complete it. Well, it's a Word for Windows document, you can just complete it, and then if you wouldn't mind just sending it back as a PDF or as a WhatsApp document to us. And then from a marketing point of view, I'd like to ask you to leave a review on Google. You can just Google IntraSafe PDY Limited and just leave a review and tell us what you think of this process and certainly the training material. And I'm open. I'm open to comments and criticism. I'm open I'm also open to receiving bottles of red wine. So all of that is gratefully received. But if you wouldn't mind doing that, and then of course I also asked you to go onto Facebook and LinkedIn and go and have a look at the processes there, because I'm going to be feeding information through all the time. Now, our affiliate program, obviously the affiliates, you'll be getting additional information over and above the rest of the folk. And if you'd like to become an affiliate, please go onto our website, fill in the request for quote, and I'll send you a request for quote. Okay, how's that for timing? I said 40 minutes, and there we go, 39:57. I want to say to you and every single one of you that have logged on since then, I'll be setting this up and putting it onto YouTube shortly. Give you an opportunity to look at it again and again and again. Please feel free to actually share this with other managers and trainers within your organization so that we can get as many people trained, informed, instructed, and trained in ergonomics as possible. And to those of you that are our affiliates, I look forward to getting this material to you as quickly as possible so you can get up and running and make some money with it. From Penny and myself, we want to say thank you. Alles van die beste. Until next time. Bye for now.